the fascinating things about cognitive training research is those tasks or technologies, they do get you better at something. They get you better at the thing, which is really phenomenal evidence for train the thing you want to be good at.
This week's episode is brought to you guys by Teamworks Tactical. If you're heading to the H2F Symposium this upcoming May from the 12th to the 14th, the Teamworks team will be on site showing how a unified tech platform supports whole person readiness across all H2F domains. Stop by booth number 301 to learn more. Team, welcome back to another week here at in the Mops and Mo's universe. Alex, hello.
I was confused for a second because you're rocking like a competitor brand right now. I wasn't sure whether this was Mops and Mo's or not.
Oh, this? Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Shout out Uphill Athlete. There's also syrup on this shirt.
Damn it.
Whoops. Cheat meal. So you texted me I was not paying any attention at all to this presidential fitness test stuff. And you texted me about you sent me the Wikipedia page, which was full of just, forgive me.
We'll talk about that in a minute. I feel like we got to lay a foundation first.
Well, so enlighten the people, because I myself had no idea what was going on and some changes were made.
Yeah, there was an announcement yesterday that I think kind of came out of the blue for most of us. I think July of last year, an executive order was signed directing, kind of renewing the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition, and specifically directing the re-implementation of the presidential fitness test, which was in place for decades. I think around 2012 or 2013, it was replaced with the Presidential Youth Fitness Program, PYFP, which I'm sure is great, but has less salience for people. That the test really stuck in people's mind for a long time. So ask anybody from the last several generations, they can all describe doing the presidential fitness test in school. But yesterday's announcement was a couple things. One, it was acknowledging National Sports and Fitness Month, which is the month of May. Happy National Sports and Fitness Month, everybody. And also kind of announcing the re-implementation of the presidential fitness test. And I will acknowledge off the bat that the announcement was kind of vague. It didn't really say that much about what they're actually doing, and there wasn't a document to go read, or at least it wasn't published anywhere as of last night when I went looking. The one thing probably most relevant to this audience is that they did make it pretty clear that the first place the mandate is going to apply to for doing the presidential fitness test, because states get some flexibility and schools get some flexibility on how they approach it, but it is going to be mandated in all of the schools on military installations. So military kids are going to be the ones kind of getting the first crack at the test. My big question, and we are reaching out to potential guests as we speak. If listeners out there know some potential good guests for this, let us know. But folks involved in this at the senior level have mentioned a modernization of the test, an updating of standards, maybe some new events. It's kind of unclear because historically it's a 1 mile run, sit-ups, either pull-ups or push-ups, shuttle run. I think plank was in there. And then sit and reach is in there.
Classic.
Funny that you say sit and reach is a classic. Sit and reach is the least evidence-based of the events. Some research has been done, and your performance on the sit and reach doesn't achieve anything. It doesn't tell you anything about your injury risk or your performance or anything. I kind of want to know. That's one of the reasons I want to know if they're changing any of the events. Does some manufacturer out there need to start making more of those sit and reach boxes where you put your feet on it and push the little slide? I don't know.
Beaverfit's about to be all over it. I mean that from a place of love. So yeah, I'm Googling this as we're talking about it. This is new to me. I honestly, I know we had kind of We've not done a whole episode on this, have we? We've talked about this before.
I feel like we did we do part of an episode on it when it was first announced last July?
I just remember looking at the history of this thing. And yeah, it went away for a while in favor of something that was sort of less competitive and
Yeah, we did
more
a full episode.
longevity. Yeah. Okay. Um, the military base school thing is that's an interesting one. I don't think I disagree with it. I like the idea of the fitness test. I mean, inevitably it's going to get like screwed up, but
I agree on like bringing back the test. I'm sold on that one. I think we could potentially play with it a little bit, both in terms of modernizing event selection and like providing resources to physical education teachers surrounding it so they can like communicate it effectively and help people prepare for it or whatever, or help people interpret their results.
I mean, I understand. I was thinking about this last night, actually, after you texted me. As the parent of a 5-year-old who is going to be in kindergarten, I can understand the arguments for taking it away because of like the competition piece. Because like truly, like you look at a kid who feels less than in like a public social environment, like you don't want to like enforce that. Now, having said that, I think that the obesity epidemic is like out of control. So doing something like this, I think what I'm saying is the competitive nature of this type of thing. I think that there is some goodness in that. I think you just have to be very surgical with how that gets fostered because there is kind of a dark side to it. Now, what you sent me, and if folks go to the Wikipedia page and go down to like the arguments against it and just the way that it's written is absurd.
It's bad.
I don't know who got a hold of Presidential Fitness Test's Wikipedia page, but yeah, that was wild. So, is this something I would trust like the political realm to like handle? Probably not, but it is the Presidential Fitness Test, I guess. Can the president pass this test?
We're about to transition into an episode that has a lot to do with like cognitive performance, sports psychology, things like that. But you alluded to something that I gotta check on. You are a father. I am not. So you have substantially more experience raising a kid than I do. Do you really think that like competition among kids is to be avoided because of like the ostracizing that might happen as a side effect?
No. And that's where I think I need to like spend some time because I think I'm for it. However, I recognize that my child has been raised in a healthy, supportive environment. So being exposed to that kind of thing is not, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but like it's not as dangerous as somebody. I just think that there's a lot of risk, especially when you get into just like public schools in general and how the public school system handles capital T tests anyway.
Sure.
I say that though, and I did not pay a lot of attention to like the Obama era stuff because I didn't have obviously kids in the system at the time.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Before we continue, I've thought about this a lot because when I was a kid, I was not physically fit or particularly athletic, right? I was okay. I wasn't like terrible, but like I wasn't anything special either. And people talk a lot about like, well, we shouldn't make kids who aren't fit feel bad about it.
Yeah.
But like giving them a grade on like a physical fitness thing is no different than grades in academic classes. And like I was a nerd, so I got good grades in academic classes and I got celebrated for that all the time. And other kids had to be ashamed of their bad grades. And nobody ever questions that. Like that's completely okay.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person because my daughter's she goes to Montessori. There are no grades. But I think where I fall is like I can see both sides. I think that the answer is in the middle. I don't think you go one extreme or the other. I think we're coming out of sort of, like I said, the Obama era where they probably went too far into the non-competitive realm. Do we swing that the other way and just like straight up bully kids who can't run a mile? No. But again, I don't know. It remains to be seen.
The thought I'll leave this off with, because I think we're about to go into the actual episode we're doing here. And this is about to be cheesy as hell, but I'm just going to go back to an argument I made in an Army Times article like 2 years ago. There's a concept called bulldozer parenting.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And it refers to parents who knock down every obstacle for their children before they get a chance to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And they are well intentioned when they are doing so. And let's be clear, these like public school physical education programs go away because parents complain about them because it makes their kids feel bad.
Yeah.
And they're doing it with the intent to protect their child from short-term harm. And I'm going to quote Rachel Sharman here. She's a psychology lecturer. It ultimately results in a psychologically fragile child, fearful and avoidant of failure, with never learned coping strategies and poor resilience.
Yeah, for sure.
There is a long-term risk from protecting kids too much that they end up without having learned all the things they were supposed to learn by going through things that are slightly challenging as they grow up. I think, who's the guy? I'm blanking on his name. He's the one who's trying to get phones out of schools.
Haidt is H-A-I.
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah,
the
anxious generation or whatever.
Exactly. There's a cool clip of him talking about like
playgrounds.
Dangerous playgrounds are good for kids because
I was thinking about that exact clip.
Exactly.
But that's a good example because in that clip, he also shows like I don't even know what era playground that like was objectively dangerous and kids could die.
Oh yeah. The early ones are incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. Clearly the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I get that. But again, like the bulldozer parenting thing, man, I have a hard time faulting parents who accidentally end up in that space because my daughter accidentally got hit in the eye with a water bottle the other day. I wanted to break that other kid's neck. So like I get it. It's tough. So I'm happy this is back, but again, like I don't know. TBD. We'll see. I know Bryson DeChambeau's on the case though.
I listened to the whole announcement. It was like 55 minutes long. I listened to everything everybody talked about. I listened to RFK Jr. talk about his dad and his uncle. I listened to Secretary Hegseth talk about what we're doing in the military. They went around the room. And I will say I don't follow golf. I don't know anything about Bryson DeChambeau. I have been skeptical of the President's Council in the past because they never seem to really do anything after they get appointed. But Bryson, I mean, when I listened to his comments, which were very brief, they were not in depth, but he seems genuinely passionate about making this thing happen. So
he's a wild dude. I'll withhold full opinion because who knows, maybe we'll get him on. However, speaking of awesome people,
nice
that's the best I can
do
in terms of a transition. Who are we talking to this point?
At this point, we will wrap up our mini episode on the presidential fitness test, and we'll come back to that one in future weeks. Because our guest today is Kathleen Oswald. She is a cognitive performance specialist. She is a certified strength and conditioning coach. She has her master's in exercise and sports science, and she is a current PhD student in cognition and instruction. She interned with 10 Special Forces Group, then worked at Army R2, and now currently works at the Space Force's Holistic Health Approach, which is their version of H2F. And separately is both a competitor and coach in dog agility, where she is a 5-time member of Team USA and a former world champion. And she, in the ultra marathon world, she has competed at the 50K, 50 mile, 100K, and 100 miler distances. And she qualified for nationals in powerlifting. So pretty cool and broadly.
It's pretty badass.
Yeah, it's a very diverse little resume there across both the cognitive side and the physical side. And we brought her on. I've been meaning to bring her on for a long time. But ever since our Job Franson episode where we talked about near transfer and far transfer, every now and then I'll see like military cognitive performance training done in a silo doing weird stuff, and it'll trigger me. And Kat is far more of an expert in that space than I am. And so we brought her back to dive into like what is being done that's working, what is being done that's not working so well, and like where she sees the space going as we kind of fix some of those problems.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, maybe I'm intentionally being inflammatory with this. I think a lot of the cognitive performance that we're seeing in this space kind of misses the mark. And if you want to understand why, I think Job Franson's episode is exactly it, like the near transfer versus far transfer. Um, so I think one of the things I appreciated about talking with Kat was that she does have some very tangible, like pragmatic, evidence backed ways of truly doing cognitive performance. And much to you and I's chagrin, she's very academically safe about all of it. We tried to poke and prod and get some, some stuff, but
She
no, I
stayed
think
very
in all,
professional despite our
very
best efforts.
professional. Yeah. And team, we hate nothing more than folks who come on this podcast and stay very professional. I'm kidding. Thank you, Kat. But no, in all seriousness, I think for the cognitive performance folks out there, I would like to do more episodes like this. I think it's an unexplored area, and I don't envy the folks out there who are trying to figure out how this is supposed to look amidst all of the things we talk about, like the objective return on investment metrics and all that kind of thing. So, not to say this is a part two of the conversation we started with Yo, but it's certainly an interesting addendum to the conversation about near transfer and far transfer.
Enjoy. We may have accidentally started the conversation before we started the conversation.
It's my fault.
I guess let's open there, Kat. What's the difference between performance psychology and cognitive performance training?
The majority of performance psychology is based around mental skills training or psychological skills training. That's your foundational skills around sports psychology, like goal setting, understanding motivation, understanding energy management, mental visualization or imagery, and stress management. That is the background that the majority of us who have a degree in sports psychology or performance psychology come into this field with. Cognitive performance training is a little bit more focused on how we develop someone's cognitive skills, which is their ability to apply cognitive functions to a specific task. So we have a relationship between mental skills training and cognitive performance, that mental skills can maybe augment our cognitive performance, right? If I can manage my self-talk effectively, hopefully it can support my ability to attend to certain information in my environment. So there's a relationship there, but they are different backgrounds and different pools of research that we're pulling from. So while there's a relationship between performance psychology and cognitive performance, they're not necessarily the same thing.
So I wonder a little bit, because I spent some time like digging into some doctrine, some articles, stuff before this conversation. And I worry that like there's an implied task, like when you title a position cognitive performance specialist, but then you hire certified mental performance consultants and they fall under the mental readiness domain. I worry that we're like not drawing that distinction very clearly when we talk about what we're trying to do. And that leads to training that's not very focused on one or the other. And I'll do a more pointed question for a second and say, according to FM 7-22 on the Army side, which certainly cognitive performance is across multiple branches and different branches have different definitions, but it says that, and I'm going to quote, cognitive skill is the ability to expand and integrate knowledge into decisions. Is that a good definition or a bad one?
I would say it's a limited definition.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole
Okay.
lot of sense as I'm sitting here reading it.
Well, I think because I do worry that like mental skills totally matter. Training service members on mental skills is important and helpful. It's just not exactly the same as cognitive performance. And I think we're probably asking these professionals to do some of both. Maybe even what we've wanted was mental performance and we just titled it weird or we treated the two as interchangeable. I'm not really sure. Is anybody else really doing cognitive performance training somewhere? Like, what are examples of teams or organizations or professionals actually doing cognitive performance?
Well, I think one of the best examples of cognitive performance done well at an organizational level is where we see simulators and virtual reality being implemented for, let's say, uh, baseball, football, right? Whether that's the UK or the American version of football. And then also even simulators within military where we're looking at let's say the Virtua simulator, where you are in a 360-degree room and you get to go through different scenarios. They have the ability to create a consequence where if you get shot in the simulation, you get zapped by a little like electric shock thing on your side. So there's a physical consequence that might create some of that arousal spike we would see. Certainly not to the same extent, but a similar example. And part of what we're looking for when we're looking at cognitive performance is creating that in situ training opportunity where we are as close to possible as doing the real thing so that we can break apart what cognitive elements are coming together in that moment where maybe there's a gap in the system where things could be refined, and then drawing on some of our novice expert research to leverage the experience of experts in that task to help novices get better faster. And I think that's where you see the relationship between mental skills and cognitive skills is that we also want those mental skills to be applied in situ. We want mental skills to be applied to specific tasks. I don't want somebody just gaining the general ability to visualize things in their head. Right? If you can visualize a deck of cards for me, it doesn't necessarily help me as much as you being able to visualize assembling and disassembling your weapon or visualize what it's like to be the first person in a stack clearing a building.
Can you, Alex, how long ago was this conversation with Yob? 2 years?
Years,
3 years.
yeah.
3 years.
It's 2023.
Who's counting, near transfer versus far transfer. Can we dive into that again? Because as you said, it's been 3 years. People may not even know what we're talking about, but it is relevant.
Absolutely. Would you like me to define those, or do you want to?
Please,
Yeah.
because I
You're
don't
the
remember
expert.
after 3 years. And yes, you're the expert.
Sure. So we do have both far transfer and near transfer that exist in cognitive training. And we want to look at that as existing on a spectrum, right? It's not very black and white. There's not one or the other. Far transfer is going to be training something that is dissimilar from our performance task and expecting it to impact our performance. Near transfer is training something as close as possible to our performance task and expecting to improve our performance. So that exists on a sliding scale, right? There are tasks that are far transfer, but maybe exist in the same environment where I have similar auditory stimulus and similar amount of cognitive load placed on an individual. Then it's maybe slightly closer to real performance than something else, but it's not as good as being able to recreate a, let's say, simulation or smaller version of the actual tactical task we're preparing for, right? That would be our best near transfer example.
To underline what she's saying, and I think it's easy when you use examples of things that are out there in the world that people are doing. I get frustrated, and I'll transition this into a question, I swear. But like, there's an idea that like the default way to do cognitive performance training in human performance settings is just to add random cognitively demanding tasks to PT sessions. So like do some CrossFit thing and then take a break and like use a fine motor skill, or do some shuttle runs and then like play a game or juggle or like whatever cognitive thing you're going to like throw in the middle of it. And I think like a theme we'll probably chase in this conversation is that you could just, instead of picking a random cognitively demanding task to inject into physical training, pick an occupationally relevant cognitively demanding task to inject into it. And all of a sudden you've moved from far transfer, where there's very little evidence that it works, to near transfer, where there's really good evidence that it works. And it's that simple. So I have to chase an example that I know you're familiar with, Kat. We've had plenty of conversations about this. As I peruse the internet's resources for military cognitive performance, it's hard not to bump into think and fight drills featured in like the U.S. Naval Institute Press. It's in like Marine Corps Times. It's in War on the Rocks. It's been like celebrated a bunch.
Did you say think and fight drills?
Think and fight drills, often referred to as maneuver chess, which is in many cases literally doing shuttle runs while you play chess. And supposedly this will make it'll turn Marines from like brutes into like thinking soldiers. And
it has to be chess.
It is in all the examples that are given. And I'll give the floor to Kat in a second, but I did find out more as I looked into it. There's some 2021 articles suggesting that not only was this like a good idea some lieutenant colonel had, but the Marine Corps really spent time restructuring infantry school curriculum to make sure there was time for chess in the curriculum at the infantry school. So I wanted to add that layer before kicking it over to Kat to digest it for us.
I will chat about chess, and then I'm going to circle back on how difficult or simple it is to bring a tactical task into a training session. Because I think there is some nuance there that we could be thinking about from the side of a cognitive performance specialist. So ironically, I have given my opinions on chess as cognitive training on quite a few occasions on LinkedIn. And one of the very, seminal works on expert versus novice research, which is a lot of the foundation under skill acquisition, which is where a lot of cognitive training pulls its foundations from. One of the very first studies was Chase and Simon, 1973, and they looked at experts versus novices being able to memorize a chessboard. So they gave photos of a chessboard with the pieces in random positions and asked chess experts and novices to memorize the chessboard. They performed the same. Because the chess pieces were in random positions on the board, there was no rhyme or reason to why the pawn was where it was. They did a second round where they looked at the pieces mid-game, and they had the experts and novices memorize the boards and then be able to replicate them or recognize them again. And the experts outperformed the novices significantly, because it's not necessarily that chess players have a better working memory or understanding of spatial awareness or any cognitive function at a baseline level. It's that they understand chess so much better than novices. So it's that integration of not only a cognitive function like working memory, but it's that cognitive function paired with your domain-specific knowledge. So that's one of the foundations of a lot of skill acquisition and cognitive training research is articles like that, looking at the disparity between novices and experts. So when you're looking at training something that is unrelated, right, one of those FAR transfer tasks, well, we're teaching individuals to make decisions and integrate information about chess into their cognitive functions instead of having them learn how to integrate tactical knowledge about maneuver of their unit or how to place different weapon systems to defend their position more effectively. Where we could actually create a quote unquote game where you give them a scenario and say, hey, here's where the enemy's positioned. Here's your unit status. Here's how much ammunition you have. Here is the 3 points where a helicopter can land for an exfiltration, right? Plan me 2 or 3 viable routes to get you from point A to point B. Right? And we could build that into a workout if we felt like physical stress was appropriate at that point in time. But I would fail to see the rationale behind why we would use a FAR transfer task when we can, as Alex mentioned earlier, create a near transfer task that leverages tactical knowledge and allows us to practice some of those cognitive functions in a relevant situation.
But Kat, that would require cognitive performance specialists to, instead of doing random siloed cognitive training, have to integrate with tactical professionals who know the occupationally relevant tasks, and they would have to collaborate to produce something like what you're discussing.
It would require a cognitive performance specialist to do that. And I have full faith that not only do many of my peers have good relationships with the professionals that they work with, right? They're around the service members every day. They might just be asking the wrong questions and or not thinking about how to integrate our subject matter experts on the tactical side into the design of training. And of course, we have this fundamental problem where military professionals are required to be respectful of civilians that come in, especially if you have a civilian who's coming in with advanced degrees and says, hey, this is how this works. Here's the outcome you're going to see. I promise you it has benefit. Even if it's lacking face validity, you might be inclined to believe the person that has advanced degrees because they say that it works, and who are you to argue? So I think we have some fundamental problems that are easily worked through if we're willing to put some of those staple classic exercises away for good and say, we're not going to play with the chessboard. We're going to sit down with some experts in the field and figure out how to create different levels of uh, tactical scenarios for people to work through. And then think through, how do we make this more or less complex to fit the needs of the individual we're actually training in the moment?
At the risk of slightly blurring the lines between my podcast identity and my day job identity, I am going to take a second and like shamelessly hype Kat, who on various occasions learned enough about orbital warfare to design like a task simulation where people take turns maneuvering satellites to try and get within certain distances of each other to be able to conduct specific operations.
Wait, is orbital warfare a real term?
That's a real term. Welcome to 2026. It's crazy.
What?
I also remember a few where like there were AI generated radio calls that people had to be listening to well under stress from other things to be able to answer questions later. So she's not talking about this like theoretically you would collaborate with tactical professionals to design occupationally relevant tasks. Like genuinely doing the thing. So that's all. That was just me.
Hold on.
Plugging Kat.
I was reading about Marine Corps chess. Now I'm reading about orbital warfare. You guys both work for the Space Force. Do we have like, are we having satellites shooting each other now?
Without crossing any lines, I think if you read anything about space operations in the last like 3 to 5 years, there has been a distinct shift towards being pretty candid about the increasing militarization of space.
I was unaware we could launch projectiles through space. Interesting.
We
Learn
can do
something
lots
new
of things
tonight.
in space.
I do. Okay, sorry. This is totally off the cuff and random, but I'm sitting here as I'm reading about this Marine Corps chess thing, which by the way is wild. This article is way too long and he's put way too much thought into this.
Kat has had fights with this guy on the internet before. For what
first question, maybe, and no offense to the Marine Corps, but 30 plus Marines that can play chess in one location at the same time?
So
okay.
I believe the way that it works is they take turns. So somebody makes a move on the chessboard, and they run right there on the white team. But
presumably these moves are within the rules of chess, right? Like pawns can go this.
Which means that it's even more of a waste of time because you've spent time teaching someone
how to play chess.
Yeah, where a bishop can move or how a knight can move on the chessboard.
To be clear, they're also carrying ammo cans while this is happening.
Well, that part's always tactical.
Well, they're doing burpees and lunges and presses and squats.
Now you're reminding me of the next example I was going to bring up, because I did, like, my prep for this episode was just perusing what's out there in terms of like quote unquote good examples of cognitive performance training for military service members. One hit home for me because it was Fort Huachuca, which is where Army intelligence trains, which is where I trained. And I'll just quote from the article: between wind sprints, ammo can carries, water jug carries, and litter carries up and down the hills of Fort Huachuca were a series of cognitive tasks involving problem solving, spatial memory, route recall, auditory memory, and end-back working memory, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems so like we were so close, right? Like you're at Fort Huachuca, you're at the place where intel training happens. You could grab actual lesson material from the like pattern analysis plot, like literal, actual tactical diagrams of things where you're supposed to make assessments that would happen in class that you might have to do in a time-constrained manner under stress in a real environment. You could just take those things and have them do them while they did all that physical stuff, and you would have been right there. But instead, and I don't have the article right in front of me right now, but I have to assume this was almost certainly outside contractors that were supposed to deliver cognitive performance stuff. So they just do it in a silo rather than integrating with the unit. And rather than just like pitching it to Kat to say why that's stupid again, because we know that now, I want to throw out a model we've been shopping around a little bit, see if Kat agrees. But I think and this probably applies to like most domains of human performance, but like rather than just providing the training in your lane, it seems like more value comes from you being a consultant to leaders to help those leaders deliver training better informed by your domain. Is that on target, Kat?
I would say so. And I think in the space of cognitive performance, a lot of that comes from letting go of doing hands-on training and creating the tasks yourself and actually teaching the service members how to build good training sessions. And the orbital warfare example is fantastic. I learned enough about classical orbital elements to be able to have a conversation to help a captain design what we called space chess for his unit. And it does have different teams making moves on a fictitious orbital plane where they can make decisions every period of time. We won't get into the space terminology behind it, but they have to use those classical orbital elements and manipulate things to either aggress after another satellite or evade another satellite. I would not have been able to build that by myself without spending a solid year trying to learn about space. And even then, I'm going to lack the ability to understand what it's like to think through a problem set in that way from the perspective of a service member. And the same is true for some of our other tasks, right? Let's say, military intelligence. Even if I read a ton about it, it's not like I'm going to have an intimate understanding of what it's like to be an expert in that space. And if we're talking about a training pipeline, that means we have access to instructors who have likely done this for a decade plus and truly are experts in their field. And even going through and having a conversation with them about how to alter some of their feedback. And I don't mean necessarily giving effective feedback like sandwiching it and saying something nice and then critiquing and then something nice. I mean changing their feedback in terms of how we're optimizing for when people get knowledge of performance and when people get knowledge of the results. So, knowledge of the results would be in marksmanship, you got 10 hits and 30 misses. Knowledge of performance is being able to go back and watch a video replay of your weapon handling and understand maybe what you were doing with your weapon that caused those 30 misses. And in some instances, you might actually see that your weapon handling was actually really efficient, but you didn't dial your scope properly, or you didn't account for wind, when you're originally setting up. So in that case, knowledge of results, right, 10 hits and 30 misses, doesn't tell me as much as being able to go back and watch some video replay. And as the cognitive performance specialist, if I can help integrate some of those learning strategies into existing training pipelines, I'm going to significantly impact people's cognitive performance related to their tasks without me having to go and build things that are novel and interesting and different. Because actually, a lot of our military training pipelines have been quite refined, and we can just add in that next layer of efficiency and learning.
So I won't spend a ton of time on this. Hopefully we fill up the conversation without me having to rely on this bank of like things I want to roast FM 7-22 about. But you did bring me to one of them because you brought up marksmanship and knowledge of outcomes versus knowledge of performance. And I think hopefully soon here we'll be able to finally do an Andrew Thompson episode where we talk about some of his thoughts on like how the way we train marksmanship is kind of backwards in terms of what we know about enhancing skill acquisition kind of stuff. But I was diving into the cognitive performance section, and one of the examples given is, and this is for attention, getting better at paying attention. For example, if Sergeant James knows he fires his weapon more accurately when in a relaxed mental state, he can take actions to prepare his mind prior to firing. This is just me venting for a second about like when doctrine is written by people that don't do the thing the doctrine is talking about. But like, I think most people would probably understand that they're better at marksmanship if they're like relaxed and focused. And like just knowing that and making sure you're like at peace and very zen on the like marksmanship range where you know the targets are going to pop up is not actually getting better at marksmanship. Because like we kind of need you, like if we're going to train you to use a weapon in combat, we need you to be able to employ it not in a relaxed mental state. Like yes, we should be able to like control our reactions to things a little bit, but like it is weird that for most service members, we only ever evaluate your marksmanship in like the most controlled, sanitized environment possible. I don't know if this is a rabbit hole we need to go down on this episode necessarily, but I get triggered by all like Andrew Thompson will go off on this later, but like I'll just leave that there, I guess.
How else would you do it? Please don't say warrior skills line.
No, I mean, you have to, just like any other task, you should like initially train the skill under as limited stress as you possibly can, and then like gradually expose people to greater levels of stress as they learn to navigate. Kat can probably talk about this better than I can. This is where we need a mental performance or cognitive performance consultant to sit down with somebody who's really good at marksmanship and walk through training design to put together something that does progress them into a place where they can handle higher levels of stress when they're doing it.
Mm. Yeah. And that's where you get into the different factors that you can manipulate, where one of the, I think it's a theoretical model, or maybe it's a conceptual model around anticipatory training. So it's perceptual cognitive skill training, which is your ability to perceive information and make decisions based on that information and act, right? We have your ability to manipulate the individual, right? So I can stress that person out. I can make them do wind sprints so they're tired. I can fatigue them, sleep deprive them. I can influence the individual. I can place time pressure on them. I can influence the task. So I can make the targets they're hitting more difficult. I could give them a spinner target. I could put a target further out in the range, or I can influence the environment, right? So I can add more auditory stimulus. I could add simulated wind or other things that are going to disrupt their processes. And when we're talking about training over a progression, we should be manipulating those things individually and then overlapping. So can I add time pressure without touching anything else? Maybe take time pressure away and change the difficulty of the shots that are being made, and then put those two things back together and say, okay, now you're under time pressure and the shots that you're taking are more difficult to hit. And then pull both of those away and add an environmental thing. Right now, add additional auditory stimulus, and we're playing sounds of, indirect fire and helicopters overhead on loudspeakers behind you. So that's extra like cognitive load placed on you just because there's more information coming in. And then put all three of those things together, right? Where you have the time pressure, there's extra auditory stimulus, and we have more difficult shots than you're taking in your marksmanship scoring, right? So we have the ability to manipulate all these different factors. And I think one of the problems we run into, and I see this as a perhaps fundamental problem of mental skills training as well, is we don't necessarily have a way to talk about progression over time. And we don't necessarily have a way to identify key training factors like frequency, volume, specificity, like we see in strength and conditioning, which is, I think, problematic when we talk about cognitive skill training, because we're always starting from this lack of common understanding, right? Because we're not talking about things like frequency and volume. It would be much better if you spent 15 minutes a day handling your weapon and taking, a few shots than it would to do it just one day for 4 hours, right? Because that frequency matters, and our ability to have some latent learning in there where you go home, sleep, and come back and have maybe gained a little bit in your skill acquisition makes a difference.
How do we okay, I'll ask this in the dumb way that it's floating around in my head, but like, how do we measure this stuff? Like if I'm the one briefing the leaders on the thing, right? And we talk about this all the time. Injury prevention looks like this graph and strength and conditioning looks like this graph. But for you guys, like what is the thing? Like what are we tracking? And you kind of mentioned it with the longevity piece, but like what are we looking at?
So in general, there are, I see it as 3 different things that we can measure and capture when it comes to cognitive performance in the military. The first one is your state measures. So how ready is your brain to perform right now? Where we can use some of our baseline cognitive function tasks like the psychomotor vigilance task, which measures your sustained attention and reaction time. On a computer-based task, you're responding to a dot on the screen and pressing a button. That's going to give us an idea against your baseline about how well your brain is operating just normally right now. And you see that in tasks, or I guess a battery like the ANAM, where maybe you're doing that pre-post deployment to see if there's any baseline difference in your brain's functioning. Very helpful. We also have your subjective measures. So something like the NASA Task Load Index is a good way to measure how demanding someone perceives this to be. I would say similar to an RPE scale in strength and conditioning, right? How difficult is this task for you right now today? It measures things like how much physical demand you're experiencing, how much mental demand, if you're feeling any time pressure, what your frustration level is, right? That subjective picture of how the person feels like they're performing in the moment. And then we also have what we would consider to be more scenario-based tasks, where we're leaning on representative task design to create a smaller, measurable, gradable version of the tactical situation we're trying to train for. Right? I'm not isolating individual tasks, right? I don't necessarily want just a marksmanship score. I want marksmanship in clearing a building or marksmanship inside of the other tasks that it interacts with, because it's very rarely that you're going to run up and have pre-placed targets in a combat situation and there's a berm in the back and there's no risk. You have your firing lane and you're going to be good to go. That's not how that's going to happen. So we need it to be a more involved interactive task. And one of the conundrums that I've run into in the research and what we've been doing in practice is a lot of times programs are relying on that state measure because it's the easiest to capture. And it looks good on paper. And I can say to someone, oh, look, this is what your reaction time looks like today, yesterday, and 3 weeks ago. However, when we look at the novice expert research, we see that expertise helps compensate for some of the degradation of cognitive functions caused by fatigue, stress, lack of sleep. So if I'm capturing someone's state and saying, oh, your reaction time is lower today than it was yesterday, I'm not sure we can definitively say that that means that they would perform less well in their area of expertise. Because their expertise, right, the mental heuristics, the shortcuts that they have, their procedural memory, their ability to leverage perception action coupling is so much stronger in that specific domain than we're going to be able to see on one of those generic state tasks. So I really think that if we're looking at measuring things over time, it needs to be a much more integrated multi-level assessment so that we're not just capturing one of those factors, right? I want to know how well your brain's functioning, especially if we're in a area of the military or tactical profession where we're at risk for TBIs or concussion. It's important to capture how well the brain is functioning at baseline. Right? If someone's severely sleep deprived, I want to be able to catch that. But I also need to know subjectively how hard do they think something is, and then also what's their performance in context, right? How are they actually applying their cognitive functions in a specific domain? So it has to be a multi-level process for us to get an accurate picture.
This week's episode is brought to you by TeamWorks. Team, we all know that connected families make better supported service members. TeamWorks keeps military families informed, engaged, and in the loop, all in one place. To learn more, visit teamworkstactical.com today. Team, this episode of Mops and Moes is brought to you by Train Heroic. Train Heroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that Train Heroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmoes.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, Train Heroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmoes.com/training to get your first week for free.
All right, I have two directions I want to go from here. One I think will be pretty easy because you kind of got this one laid out for us. As I dove into cognitive performance, I saw brain health, mental performance, and cognitive performance all kind of treated as one lumped together thing. Like you mentioned ANAM and pre-post deployment screening for like TBI stuff. And that's very much like brain health. Like that's its own thing. And I think there's this risk of assuming that the types of things that help for either maintaining brain health or treating a deficit in brain health should also take us past baseline into the performance realm. And that, am I correct in my understanding that is not really the case? Those are kind of two different things we have to approach differently.
That is absolutely a correct assumption that taking you from a place of damaged brain health, right, or subpar from where we want you to be or where you were previously at to get you back to baseline is a different process. And some of those more generic tasks become more relevant if we're working with somebody who's recovering their brain. And that's actually where I ran into a lot of different tasks and stumbled into actually Job Franson's work. Was I was trying to learn more about TBI recovery and rehabilitation, and I ran into all these tasks, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I can have someone leverage their cognitive functions. And then as I dug deeper, I went, oh no, I don't want them to just leverage their cognitive functions. That's appropriate for somebody who's recovering and rehabilitating, but maybe not appropriate for somebody who wants performance enhancement.
The other direction I wanted to go, which your mention of the NASA task load index was the first time I had heard of this thing. So I Googled it. I've been scrolling through it. This thing, it looks fascinating.
NASA task load index.
Yeah, and I can send you the link to it. It'll come up right away if you search it. But I do want to, I said I was going to try and minimize this, but I got to once again compare to the language in FM 7-22, which the doctrine says, and this is a complete sentence, I have not edited out any relevant context. Cognitive load is the amount of information a soldier can memorize in the short term in order to learn something new. I have a feeling that Kat will probably disagree with that definition, and I would love to give her a chance to, for the listener's sake, explain a little bit of what the NASA task load index is. And I will say, if you don't have it like super memorized, I'm happy to help because I have the website pulled up right now.
I definitely don't have it memorized. I would say that, once again, I think the definition that's provided is perhaps limited. Cognitive load does impact our ability to hold on to information and learn new things, but it is a much more complex theory than what it was maybe led to be in writing.
That was so polite.
We're actively trying to get you to speak less academically as we're going through this, because you're doing a really good job of like thesis defense style speaking.
It's how I get in trouble. What if someone sends this to my boss?
I need
Fun fact,
a little
he's
bit of trouble
here.
If somebody's getting in trouble here, it's obviously me.
It's excellent. I'll throw you under the bus so fast.
So I'll lay out real quickly, because I kind of like their model. I do wonder if Kat has any insights into some pieces I don't totally understand here.
Sure.
But the NASA task load index combines 6 subscales, which themselves are somewhat complicated.
What?
But mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, performance, effort, and frustration. And I was wondering how they combine those things. And frankly, it looks like they kind of just average them. They rate them all on like a 0 to 100 scale and then average them. But I guess it's a weighted average. So it's importance weight and then the rating of difficulty in that domain. So I'm curious, like, have you gone deep on this? Like, what is there to, like, what should we take away from how NASA approaches assessing task load?
So I think one of the benefits you get from that subjective self-report, where you have multiple different scales we're taking a look at, is you can help identify maybe where some of those gaps are based on where that perceived effort was. Where if somebody puts down that the temporal aspect of this task, which would be your time pressure, if they put that down as part of the problem, well, hey, maybe that leads us into a different conversation, a different debrief around that task or around their experience. And then we can highlight maybe how we work time pressure into their training in a more eloquent way. Whereas if somebody else says, hey, the physical demand of this was way over my pay grade, maybe then as a cognitive performance specialist, I actually refer you out because I just need you to have a better cardiorespiratory system so that you can perform better in this task. So I think it gives us some flexibility to help shape training, which of course, if we're collecting data, it should be for a purpose and for a use. So I think the ability to go through it and make some decisions about that person's individualized training helps. And then we also just have the ability to ask the service member to reflect on their experience, which I think in itself is a really powerful learning tool for the individual. because we're not always sitting down and taking the time to actually reflect and think through our experience, especially through all those different lenses.
Before we wrap up the NASA TLX thing, I will say, on brand for NASA, and I will drop this link in the show notes, but extremely helpful website for the TLX. If you scroll to the bottom, they have like a bunch of lit reviews, research processes, history of the thing. And the one I just pulled up, it's like I think it's called NASA TLX 20 years later. 5-pager, only 4 pages of like real text. The 5th page is just citations. But it talks through like all the research they looked at for this, whether that research was done in government, military, industry, academia, like really cool approach to like synthesizing all this stuff into a tool that can be either done on like a paper and pencil or iPhone app that like gives you a pretty good idea of how these things interact with each other. Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I want to know, and I've asked this question a couple of times to different people, but like it all sounds very complex, right? I mean, we've listed off now about 1,000 different surveys and apps and tools. Like, how do you scale this? How do you industrialize this? How do you make this work for 1,000 soldiers with one person, you know?
Well, again, I think, as Alex mentioned earlier, it's shifting the perspective from a cognitive performance specialist is a one-on-one coach or a group trainer to having them be more of a consultant, where instead of working with the entire platoon in the Army, give me the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant and have us sit down and talk about the training calendar and where we can break things apart more effectively. Where can we get people more reps? I mean, if you go to any military installation, there are soldiers sitting around doing nothing for many hours of the day, where we could be having them handle their weapons more or having more conversations about decisions in situ. And I think part of that too is teaching our, leadership teams how to talk about and break down some of the decisions they make, what information is relevant, to just give some of those novices a better context about what should I be paying attention to. And that's where we go into this problem of when you decouple the cognitive function from the task, we lose that really important context. Because I can't just teach you pay attention more or have better sustained attention if you don't know what you're supposed to be attending to in the environment. So instead, having a platoon sergeant who's had multiple deployments sit down and explain, hey, when we're walking down the street in a formation in a hostile area, these are the things that I'm looking for. These are the things I'm listening for. And, here's how I respond, or here's, what I would say next or do next if one of those sources of information popped up as like a red flag and got my attention, right? Here's how I would evaluate the situation, right? And gosh, you run into all sorts of more nuanced conversations that, again, your tactical professional is going to be able to speak to so much better than someone from the outside, such as how to evaluate kinematic cues. Just because you see a person walking between an alleyway doesn't mean that they're an adversary, right? It could very well be just a civilian. Even if they're sprinting or they look panicked, maybe it's a kid running from building to building. So just because someone's running at you, maybe, doesn't necessarily mean that they're somebody who is a threat. How do we actually assess whether someone's a threat or not? And that's where you could leverage some of those personal experiences from folks who've had to make those decisions, right? Hey, your weapon is in high ready and you're staring down the barrel at a human being. How do you make that decision? What are the factors that come into play? Right? Is it whether they're holding a weapon or not? Is it their hand position? Is it some aspect of intent that you can judge? And the answer is likely yes. And we see that in the research on sport performances, where experts are able to observe a situation or observe their opponents in a very specific way that gives them information about how to make decisions. And I think that's where we need the shift to become cognitive performance specialists as these consultants who teach people how to train better and teach people how to be experts, rather than this outside element that's providing irrelevant cognitive games. It's just not going to have the same impact.
Is this a contrarian viewpoint that you have here in your industry? Like, why are we not? Because it makes sense, but why are we not doing this? Why are we still looking at this like? And I know we'll talk about it in a bit, but this like cognitive performance level 1 training manual that uses grids and things. Like, why aren't we doing what you're talking about?
Well, unfortunately, it is a big concern of mine that in the next 10 or 15 years, cognitive performance specialists might not be a job role. I don't think that we've demonstrated effectiveness in the field. I think that there's a lot of cognitive technology that's being purchased. And if you understand evidence appraisal, I think those are actually some pretty unethical choices because we can look at the research and say, almost definitively at this point, there's very limited research on FAR transfer. And some of the articles that show quote unquote evidence are extremely methodologically flawed, or they actually only show near transfer. Play a cognitive game and get better at a different cognitive game, right? Not get better at your performance. And I worry about the ethics of some of those decisions and where we're placing time, effort, and funds. I worry about the future of my field. And that's one of the reasons why I am pretty vocal about my perspectives and some of the research that I've read, is I want people to understand that there is a better evidence-based way to target cognitive skills training that's going to create, has higher face validity. There's better buy-in. It allows you to integrate with the unit more effectively. It allows us to have a better understanding of tactical tasks overall, because you have to have those conversations about how to break things down and what in the environment's important. So it helps us understand our population better. But I think you run into the conundrum again of that's not the background we all have. We don't have a background in skill acquisition and cognitive training and cognitive skills. We have a background in performance psychology. So then you run into this almost foundational disparity of the foundation that we all have isn't the foundation that we need to go into this.
Before we continue, I know Drew has more on that one. I do want to clarify. Drew mentioned I forget what the name of the product is called, like cognitive performance training.
It's the cognitive performance,
level 1.
level 1 training manual.
If people want to dive into that, I can probably drop a link in the show notes, or they can easily find it. Fun fact for people who aren't tracking, the H2F website has domain pages, and each of those domain pages has a list of resources at the bottom. This is one of the resources listed on the mental domain page. It appears to be an Air Force Special Operations product originally. And yes, it does. Like, one of the exercises is attention strength training, where you just pick an object. The examples it gives are doorknob, light switch, rock, spot on the wall, etc., and just focus on that thing for a specified amount of time. Just like, I've picked the doorknob, I'm just going to focus on the doorknob for as long as I can. And like, that does seem like it
silly, dumb, weird.
I can understand the logic that leads to it, right? Like, if we're gonna train muscular strength and we have these domains of cognitive performance, we should train those things. And one of those things is attentional control. And so we should practice paying attention to things. But I think it's just not as generalizable necessarily. This is where I got frustrated when I first got into this space. Like, one of the things, we'll rewind to when I was working at HECOstix headquarters, there was like a little bit of a push to use the like app-based psychomotor vigilance test to assess cognitive performance, mental readiness, whatever we want to call it. And I get it. Like, that's a standardized task that appears in research. People have used it to assess brain health, cognitive function, things like that. But if we make on like a daily or weekly or even monthly basis, soldiers take the like long version of the psychomotor vigilance test, it's horrible. Like, you will quit from boredom before you reach the limits of your cognitive performance. Like, it is genuinely, you stare at a screen and every now and then a dot appears on the screen and you click it. That is the whole thing. You just keep doing that as long as you can. And maybe I am just not that good at attentional control.
You
Or
need
maybe
to
I'm just complaining.
stare at some doorknobs, dude.
I guess I need to practice.
Kat, but like,
that's all. I want to provide context.
Kat, I
think one problem in, let's say, staring at the doorknob is we've just kind of missed the mark in the fact that you're not necessarily training attention when you're doing that. But there is value in, let's say, doing something for a prolonged period of time. My example would be go run on a treadmill at a decent pace for an hour or 2 or 3 and stare at a blank wall. No podcast, no music, no television, just run. Can you be in your own head for that period of time? Right? Where now we could say, hey, that's a great opportunity to train some mental skills. I worked a little bit when I was prepping for my first 100-miler on running and being bored because I figured my phone battery wouldn't last that long and I'd have to be alone with my own thoughts for a period of time. So I got really good at running on the treadmill and just visualizing what it would be like to run in Arizona. And I would just have like my own little mental field trip to watching cacti and coyotes run by. And it was really beneficial for the event that I was prepping for. And it did make me a lot more comfortable just being in my own head. But it wasn't for the sake of training attention. It was for the sake of getting good at being bored, right? And taking away the fun, and taking away the stimulus.
We have done a psychedelics episode if you want to take like a mental field trip to watching cacti and animals go by.
I'm pretty sure that's against my employment policies.
Have you heard, I don't know if it's still a trend, have either of you heard of raw dogging on flights?
Oh.
Yes.
I just wanted to like toss that in here when we talk about intentional boredom. For folks who are unaware, you basically stare at the in-flight map for, I think the longest one I saw was like 20 plus hours. To me, that seems like absolute mastery of what the aforementioned doorknob exercise. I guess my question, sorry, total random pivot here, but like the question I wanted to ask is like, what are we doing? Like, what are we really doing here? Like, what are we trying to do? Because no matter where we go with these cognitive performance conversations, it always seems to just become like another list of surveys we should be taking. Is that a uniquely military thing? Is that a uniquely like even just Western thing? Like who out there is like doing this well? And what does that look like? Like, what's the outcome? Is that esoteric enough for you?
I think the fundamental problem that we have is we're supposed to show effectiveness. And unfortunately, cognitive performance is so closely tied with tactical performance, you can't isolate it. As soon as you try to isolate working memory, we've lost the context within it was supposed to be working.
Exactly.
So
are we like, but are we, so I guess my point there, so we're defining effectiveness through a kind of preconceived lens of what truly is effective. Whereas, because my take on this has always been, and I guess we've talked about it in a roundabout way, using terms like squishy when we think about these things. It's like, for this to make sense at the level of, a brief to a senior leader or whatever, you have to kind of redefine what you're looking for in terms of effectiveness. And Alex and I have said all the time, I think about that conversation we had with Newton at Google is like, how do you know it's working? It's like, it just works. And I think, I mean, is it safe to say, or does it make me sound like an idiot to say that cognitive performance is kind of like that?
So I would agree with that notion. And I see that coming into play when we look at the scenario-based tasks. I'm trying to, with that, create a task that is as similar to actual performance as possible. I'm also going to use scenario-based tasks or simulators as training. You might be worried about the practice effect. If we have someone do Stroop task, where they're deciding whether the word is the word blue or the color of the text is blue, if you practice that over time, you will get better at Stroop task. You have not improved your executive functioning, but you'll get better at the task because of the practice effect. When it comes to scenario-based tasks, I want there to be a practice effect. I want you to get better at the thing. If that means that your score on the test also goes up, fantastic, because the test is the thing that we're training for. So you run into this conundrum of we're trying to isolate things and pull them apart and separate them from the tactical side, when in reality it should just be, can we get better at training tactical professionals? That's the goal of a cognitive performance specialist. Is this person operating at full capacity, right? Full cognitive capacity, which means that we've taken care of their holistic health, right? They're fueling well, they have good exercise habits, they're resting well, they have some relaxation practices, they have a good foundation of mental skills. And then beyond that, do they know how to have good routines, good visual search strategies, good information pickup, effective decision paradigms for the tasks that we're actually training them for. And again, I think that comes from us leveraging those subject matter experts on the tactical side to help guide some of our decisions around what does it mean to be an expert in this space.
So like I guess at risk of throwing your entire profession under the bus, and I apologize in advance to all of you, but like, are the folks who are currently doing this work like afraid, like do they know this and they're just sort of like afraid to take this on and be the be the change they want to see in the world? Or is the military environment just not necessarily conducive to this kind of freestyling, if I could use that word?
Well, probably two main problems. The first one being that some people have avoided those quote unquote cognitive games
Mm-hmm.
and focused more on sleep, stress management, mindfulness practices, which does provide a limited benefit. And we do see a domain general improvement when we focus on those things. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
some of the cognitive performance specialists out there who I've talked to have had a positive effect on the units that they work for because they focus on things that they know work rather than playing the games. The second problem you run into is what are all the resources that are available online through military organizations for cognitive training that set the standard and set the example for what I think Alex said Air Force Special Warfare was using?
Mm-hmm. A
I've
lot of
seen some that
podcasts, a
have
lot of
come out of
books.
SOF as well, where
Mm-hmm.
it's concentration grids and math problems and training Stroop task. And when that's the example that you give graduate students right out of college or people who know nothing about tactical, they come in and they think, oh, cool, this is how this is done. This is how this is done at the highest level, the jobs that I want to be at in 5 or 6 years. This is how it's done. Why would you deviate from that without good reason? And I don't see a lot of evidence appraisal when we go out and buy cognitive tech beyond, oh, look, there's a good looking p-value on this study. It must work. We're not really being rigorous in our evaluation of the methodology and our ability to generalize the results to a different population.
Okay, I had two other things I wanted to talk about, but since you've mentioned like purchasing of cognitive technology using taxpayer dollars a few times, I need to like just trigger you for a second. And I feel like like light boards.
Mm.
I've heard you talk about HECOstix a lot.
HECOstix?
I have seen ones where like soccer balls move around a screen at you. Like what are the worst offenders in this technology space?
Oh, HECOstix.
All of them. HECOstix is probably the cheapest, at least.
Is this? Have I Googled this
As a
correctly?
reference
It's
point,
like
it's a
three.
3-pronged boomerang with different colors,
You're supposed to
and you
catch
chuck
certain
it at people,
arms.
and they have to catch the right.
And this is some sort of thing that's supposed to do something?
No, there's no research on HECOstix even. I don't know who decided that it was a thing. I think probably some OT somewhere created it for kids and somebody took it, and that's my opinion on how it was probably created. I don't actually know what the
What was the
foundation was,
one
but
we
there's no
bumped
research
into,
on it.
Kat? I think it used like blaze pods, like the lights that light up when you hit them, but it was like inside a huge like dodecahedron,
Cage,
and you
yes.
like, yeah, what was that?
I think the cage and the fit lights were separate, but brought together. And again, we run into this problem of people assume that cognitive functions and exercising cognitive functions means that they're training a cognitive skill. And they're not, because the cognitive skill is domain specific. And if you train people to get better at hitting flashing lights, they're getting better at hitting flashing lights. Even if you manipulate some of the other factors, and I think we have a misconception that we're increasing the ecological validity of a training session by putting flashing lights in specific spots. Where, let's say I have someone clear a building and, they have their dummy weapon and there's lights flashing. Well, first of all, I don't know that I want my service members learning how to shoot flashing lights, because that's creating some procedural memory for them of, I see a flashing light, I should shoot. When they're really tired and stressed, that might be a problem. Outside of that fundamental issue, it's missing the other perceptual cognitive skills, because a flashing light isn't the stimulus we're trying to learn how to respond to. The stimulus we're learning how to respond to is a person, and are they in a threatening position or not? Are they holding a weapon or not? Right? What can be considered a weapon? When I was doing stuff over with some special forces operators, I showed them a photo of someone with a drill once, and they said weapon. And I took a step back and I was like, you know what? I suppose in the right context, perhaps.
You ever seen Jason Bourne? He killed a dude with a pen. So just throwing it out there.
So, right. But again, that's one of those subjective, very context specific, right? If someone was, putting a drill down, that's not in a threatening position. But if someone was running at you with a power drill, that might be a weapon. I would agree. That's a threat for sure. Right. But it's the kinematic information and what that person's doing that we want to learn about and get better at and refine. So when it comes to the cognitive tech, again, it's targeting those baseline cognitive functions, reaction time, inhibition, working memory, some temporal judgment. And there's things that they're targeting, but it's all isolated. It's taken out of context, and it doesn't develop the skill that we think we're developing. I think the only way to judge which one is the worst would be which one are we spending the most money on. And you run into this problem of those companies do a really good job showing you a spider graph of all the things that you're improving. Or they show you a progress board where, if you use this app over 7 sessions, you've trained your attention for X number of hours. And that sounds really good because we're able to quantify things, but we're quantifying things that don't mean anything. There's no value to the data that we're collecting. You're wasting time and money and mental effort. And that's why I run into this as an ethical problem. Because if we're wasting the time, the money, and the mental effort of our service members, that is a massive issue. If there was something else in the military that was doing that, we would eradicate it pretty quickly, especially when you dug around a little bit and found out that there was a large body of literature that said this doesn't work.
Okay, I swear I still have one more question I want to get to, but now I have 2 more sidebars I have to chase.
This is what he does. This is what he does.
This is how every day is with him. So
yeah, this is what he does.
She knows. She works with me. Another website I bumped into, and I know Kat will be familiar with this already, but as I was reviewing what was out there, I found myself on the NeuroTracker website.
Oh, Jesus.
And at the top, so the page I ran into on their website is titled Best Brain Training Apps for Military. And it says, cognitive readiness is a crucial component of military performance. Soldiers, pilots, and tactical teams operate in high-stress environments where split-second decision-making, sharp attention, working memory, and situational awareness can make the difference between mission success and failure. Brain training apps are increasingly being integrated into military and defense programs to sharpen these cognitive abilities, both during training and operational deployment. Below are some of the most research-backed tools used in military and elite tactical contexts.
We used to have one.
Kat, do brain training apps work?
Brain training apps are not improving our cognitive skill in performance.
What do you really want to say? What do you really want to say?
That is what I want to say. And that's one of the fascinating things about cognitive training research is those tasks or technologies, they do get you better at something. They get you better at the thing, which is really phenomenal evidence for train the thing you want to be good at. So when we look at something, let's say like Synaptech, they have a bunch of research articles on their website, and they show evidence that, if you train on Synaptech, you get better at the vision tasks on this platform. And I've gone through quite a few of the research articles that they cite on their website as evidence, and the vast majority of them show that we are training that skill in context of the computer program and the platform, but don't necessarily demonstrate any of that far transfer that we expect to see. So a lot of that cognitive tech does create near transfer effects. If you train the computer game, you'll get better at a different computer game. Just like somebody who, let's say, hopefully video game gamers don't come after me for this, but if somebody is really good at Call of Duty, they might be predisposed to be pretty darn good at Halo. Because there's probably a lot of overlapping skills in those two games, right? First-person shooter games, there may be similar rules of engagement or similar buttons you have to press for weapon handling, right? So we'd actually see like the perception-action coupling of like what I see and like what movements I have to do are actually pretty closely related. So that's near transfer. Fantastic. That's what we see when we look at a lot of this cognitive tech, is that it does show near transfer. But what we're looking for is far transfer, and there's limited to no evidence to suggest that far transfer exists anywhere across any of the technology or the games that we can play. So instead, why don't we take the lesson that's actually being presented? Near transfer works. Figure out how to train the thing that you want to get better at.
So, like, I'm just jumping in here, but like, I'm on NeuroTracker's website. No offense to these guys, but just going to throw this out here, see what you think of it. U.S. Air Force selected NeuroTracker as a core technology to accelerate the training of Top Gun pilots in their Pilot Training Next initiative. With regular NeuroTracker training, pilots successfully graduated in half of the conventional time. Due to this success, the U.S. Army also adopted NeuroTracker for Army Training Next. What?
So before we go too deep down this rabbit hole, well, actually, this is taking us deeper down this rabbit hole. I also stumbled upon the claim about accelerating pilots' ability to get to Top Gun graduation
because of this technology.
Because they do, and like just to be clear, like we're taking on NeuroTracker pretty hard right here, but there is a line on their website that says multiple studies have shown NeuroTracker's impact on attention, working memory, and visual processing speed with far transfer effects to real-world tasks. Then it says extensive use of NeuroTracker training by the U.S. Air Force led to significant reductions in the time it took trainee pilots to Top Gun graduation. And there is a hyperlink in there. And the words that are hyperlinked are the words NeuroTracker training by the U.S. Air Force. What do you think that would link to?
A study.
An article?
Presumably a study about Air Force pilots. It is not. It looks like this was like a dissertation written by a guy named Brendan Parsons trying to graduate from the like optometry department at school in Montreal, I think. Let's check.
God, we are down a deep rabbit hole.
It's published, he graduated, so.
University of Montreal, yes. Yeah. I couldn't find it anywhere other than NeuroTracker's website. They have it downloadable. I may need to reach out to this Brendan Parsons guy. It looks like he looks like he did graduate, and he looks like he still does actively publish on this topic. Nothing to do with pilots.
Well, speaking of, sorry, I'm going to throw one in here too, because I'm on this same website and there's a lot of scrolling publications. One of them says the impact of egg consumption on visual cognitive performance and nutrition, vision, and cognition and health. Looking at the fine print, nutrients of eggs. For folks that don't know, NeuroTracker, and Kat, jump in here if I'm doing this wrong. Basically, TV, 3D balls bouncing around, and you click on them, right?
It's multiple object tracking. So it does have, let's say, a feature that's known as adaptive workload, where if you are successful, it makes it harder. It gives you more balls to track. If you are unsuccessful, it either takes a ball away or slows things down. So there's an adaptive workload built in.
Yes.
And you track the 3D balls as they bounce around the 3D room. And when they pause, you have to select which ones were originally highlighted.
That's right. Okay. Because like I said, I have used these before. Alex, are we safe to say here? Like anyone on NeuroTracker wants to come on and talk to us, like feel free.
I will happily talk to NeuroTracker people.
Can I come?
Please.
Maybe. That might
that
be
would
helpful.
actually be very interesting. I don't know. I mean, Alex, I stole your line of thinking. You see stuff like this and it is sexy. Like the website is well done. It's an attractive technology and it gets incorporated into presumably your field. And then it defines your field in a way because like Alex mentioned, this is what like the top dudes are using. And we just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, I feel like we've just totally missed the mark.
I would also, I've been impressed with the network on this podcast before if anybody listening is involved in Air Force pilot training and had any affiliation with the Pilot Training Next program, which is like
we
where
could find
NeuroTracker
someone
made
for
their way in,
sure.
I would love to find somebody who can speak to like the results that were found of that. And if it was the case that it did in fact have far transfer effects that improve pilot training, like that's something I think should be out there and we should know about. So like if somebody actually
Just text
somebody
Astro.
like, I mean, I probably will,
Yeah, he'll
because
know
those guys probably know.
Yeah,
We
for
should get like slightly back on track. I want to take a second real quick, and this is just me hustling for future podcast guests. For a guy who refused to come on the podcast, I have sold a lot of books for Jerry Muller. But the tyranny of metrics, I feel like we've been talking around this issue a bunch the last few minutes of like, we need to separate the cognitive skills from the context so that we can independently quantify it and demonstrate performance. That is classic metric fixation, where you are undermining the quality of the training itself in order to make it quantifiable so that you can assess the effectiveness of the training you've just ruined. Like that's absolutely classic. I probably need to harass Jerry again. And for the audience, Jerry seems like a great guy. He's been very responsive to my messages. He just acknowledges that he's a history professor who just like went on a side quest and wrote that book. And it was years ago. And he's like not that up to speed on the content anymore. But I'm going to have to hustle him because it's become relevant so many times that I need him to get fresh on that content again.
Yeah. Go read your book again, dude.
Final actual question before I think Drew will close us out, because this came up as we were chatting earlier today. The interaction of expertise and fatigue. And I think this is particularly relevant because like the military is obviously very interested in both cognitive performance and fatigue management. Those two things do overlap. But when we use generic tools, classic example, psychomotor vigilance test, when we use those kinds of tools, they can, what I think I got from you earlier today was that can miss important phenomena where expertise is dramatically relevant.
Yes. So we have this conundrum of we can capture how someone's baseline cognitive functions, right, their mental capacity has been impacted by fatigue, lack of sleep, or stress using a generic task like the psychomotor vigilance task. But we have this confounding factor of expertise level that comes in and changes how fatigue may impact actual performance. So again, once we isolate that cognitive function, we're maybe losing track of the broader picture of how that cognitive function is applied in context. And there was a study in 2018 on pilots, actually, that was by Nairi and Kang that looked at only 6 pilots, so relatively small sample size, but they looked at novices versus experts, 3 of each on the psychomotor vigilance task and on their performance during a simulated B-52 flying experience over a prolonged period of time. And they looked at their eye tracking data and their gaze behaviors during that performance. And what they found is, of course, under fatigue, both parties had a decrease in baseline cognitive abilities. The experts had a slightly higher baseline than the novices, but again, relatively small sample size, so hard to say how that would work on a larger sample size. And they also found that even under fatigue, our experts had more efficient visual search strategies and less errors and more efficient pickup of information during the flight than the novices did. So we have this conundrum if, let's say, you're taking a picture of someone's cognitive capacity and everyone's an expert. We can't necessarily say, oh, you were short of baseline by 5%. You shouldn't go to work today because you're a risk. I'm not sure that that's true. And to Alex's point much earlier in the conversation, I want someone to be able to shoot their gun while they're tired and stressed and fatigued. I need you to be able to perform in that state. And what we see is that if you develop a certain level of expertise, you are more resilient to the stress and sleep deprivation and fatigue for that specific task, because your expertise is going to help compensate. We're using less mental energy and we are more efficient in our cognitive processes to begin with. We have a little bit of wiggle room to be fatigued and stressed. And
I feel like
you see that on an anecdotal level too, if you talk to someone about their performance.
there's like a really important takeaway there for military in particular. We've done a couple episodes on sleep stuff previously, and I think we've largely established you can't really practice getting sleep deprived. Like you can't get better at being sleep deprived. But what you are saying here is that you can mitigate the effects of fatigue by being an expert in the thing you might have to do under fatigue. And that is an important distinction, and that is worth acknowledging and being aware of it when we talk about should we or should we not train under fatigue, or like separate question here, can we improve performance when people inevitably are fatigued? That I think that closes that. But that's just to say that seems to have serious ramifications for training design and how we would prepare for the reality of sleep deprivation and fatigue. That's all.
Yep. And that's where we see the blending of mental skills and cognitive skills. Because if I can work through a training pipeline and say, hey, we're going to get you really good at doing the thing that you're supposed to do, that's our cognitive side. And then if I add into that, I'm going to teach you how to manage your energy effectively. I'm going to teach you how to manage your stress levels in down periods so that we don't waste extra mental energy or physical energy. We're going to talk about self-talk, motivation, and focus from that mental skills lens to help augment your performance in that tactical task. And we can see that mirroring of mental skills and cognitive skills benefiting the overall performance, but both of those have to be specifically targeted at the tactical task, not abstract concepts or juggling or whatever else we want to use to help mimic cognitive functions.
HECOstix or HECOstix. HECOstix. Okay, closer. And in fairness, you basically spent the entire episode already answering this question, but I do want to ask you directly because I'm curious your thoughts. Let's go out on a limb and assume that more than just Alex and my mom are listening to this, and there's a handful of cognitive performance specialists out there. So this is kind of the keys to the kingdom question, right? Like if there's like one thing you want to put out, or if you were in charge for a day, like what would you do / tell your industry? Like, hey, get your shit together. This is what it should look like.
I think the very first thing I would ask of folks is to approach cognitive performance with more of a growth mindset than perhaps some of the conversations I've had online. Now, that being said, I have had fabulous conversations with other cognitive performance specialists from all branches who are very, very receptive, interested, want to know how to do more. And we've actually sat down and talked through their population. I love having these conversations, and most people work with tasks that are simpler than orbital warfare. So it's really fun to think about what constraints might be placed on a pilot or a Marine or someone on deployment in an armor group brigade versus aviation. And we can have these conversations about where can we manipulate different factors? What environmental things are coming into play versus how do we change the stress around the person in realistic ways? And then we run into more nuanced conversations too of, hey, if someone's prepping for Ranger School versus Special Forces assessment and selection, that changes how we're going to prep them, despite those both being higher level, training pipelines or very physically demanding environments. In one of those, I might want you mentally prepared to get smoked a lot more and yelled at, and maybe viciously so. In the other one, you might not be yelled at, but you may be offered consistently of the opportunity to step away and quit. Where if we open up the conversation and say, hey, I'm going to throw out the things that I once did and come at this and just learn more about what my service members are preparing for, what they actually need to do to show up and do their best, then we can backtrack and say, how do I build training around that? Or how do I go find concepts in the research that actually support learning and the development of expertise, which we are missing in our current practices because we're trying to isolate things and focusing on cognitive functions when cognitive skills are a integrated, contextually specific process. And my offer to anybody who is a cognitive performance specialist is reach out to me. I will have a phone call with anyone and everyone. I have yet to say no. I will never charge you money for my time. I love these conversations. And as Alex knows, I have terrible work-life boundaries.
Extremely bad work-life boundaries, but thank you for not only dealing with me during the day, but also dealing with me in the evening now for a podcast. So thanks for coming on.
My boss said I had to. So
Again, I cannot direct you to participate in any outside of work activities. And this has none of our opinions, as you'll hear listeners, don't skip the disclaimer that's coming in 7 minutes or whatever that says we are not representing any official organizations. These are only our own opinions. That certainly applies in this particular episode.
But thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. Always a fun time.
Team, welcome to the after party. And listen, I'll just throw it out there because you put it in the notes. We've been going back and forth about this keys to the kingdom question now. Apparently, I'm oftentimes unaware of this. Apparently, I say for the day. You have the keys to the kingdom for the day. What would you do? And that you don't like that? That bothers you?
I forget who it came up with. You used this question on a recent episode.
First, I kept screwing it up and say keys to the castle, which is not the same.
Yeah, well, we fixed that. We fixed it from keys to the castle to keys to the kingdom. But I think you might have used it with General Klein, and his answer was right. Well, he can't make the change in a day.
Yeah.
So
I got stomped on by a multi-star general. Sometimes that's what it takes, man. Just getting humbled by
you need multi-day keys to the kingdom. You need to both seize and hang on to power long enough to make your changes stick.
Fair. Anyway, so I know we've been talking about having Kat on for a long time. I mean, you see her every day, and you've talked about some of her hot takes, and I don't know. I don't know what it is about cognitive performance, and hopefully this came through in the conversation. It's to me, at least, of all the professions in this space, this is the most fascinating because I think it's probably the most, important is probably the wrong word, but it so surgically focuses on the human and the human mind and your ability to just function well in your environment, which seems critical, but it's also the one that we all we're pissing in the wind in a lot of ways. Case in point, no offense, but the NeuroTracker reference we gave, rife with just toys and games and shit. And then she clearly has a keen eye for what is effective. And that's kind of why I asked that question of why aren't people doing this?
Drew, across the domains of performance, readiness, wellness, whatever we're calling them, physical, mental, spiritual, social, cognitive,
financial in some cases.
Financial. Yeah. There are lots of domains depending on how you want to take it. Which one does the military treat as though it is the most important?
Physical.
Why?
Because it's measurable and we like PT tests.
Because it is the easiest to measure. We are so wrapped up in metric fixation. Jerry Muller, I'm coming after you. I'm going to get you one day. We are so wrapped up in what's quantifiable that we allow that to drive where we invest our time, energy, and resources. It's the classic McNamara fallacy thing at work. Only quantifiable things must be important. So we literally make our cognitive training worse just so that we can quantify it more easily.
Well, I'll double down on that. And I know few folks actually listen to this part of it. So I'll try and fold this into the episode we're going to do on how we would fix H2F. But a conversation that has come up a lot lately, it seems, and maybe this is just specific to my location, but amongst people in leadership positions, i.e. program directors and such, it's why do we feel like we are having to justify our existence on a quarterly basis? There's a legitimate, and I don't know if this is the same in other branches, at other levels, in other programs, whatever, but there's this constant hum of this could go away. This could go away at any point. Despite the fact that you have shown massive return on investment. And for every dollar spent in hiring somebody, this is how much the military say, yada, yada, yada. But this is a nice to have, not a need to have. And it's the first thing that's going to be cut if ever, funding, blah, 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 blah. And so I think some of this metric fixation kind of organically rises to the top because you're sort of constantly either directly or indirectly told, you better show me why you're important or else you're going away. And the only language that I understand in terms of showing importance is metrics. I, in this case, being like purse string holders, decision makers, whatever. So I think, and again, I referenced it in the episode. I think we should continue to reference it because so often we look to the industry to say like, industry as a whole to say like, what's best practice? Newton Chang, Google, millions and millions of dollars, tons and tons of people. And maybe he simplified it a little bit, but at the end of the day, it was like, we know investing in people works. We don't necessarily need you to show us that on a spreadsheet every quarter, every fiscal year. Like, it's just, I don't know, that's tangential, but it's just wild to me. And I can understand why we literally degrade a profession like cognitive performance because we have to chase metrics, because if you don't have metrics, hey, you're fired.
At the risk of making the after show too long, have you heard of the principal agent problem?
I have heard of the principal agent problem.
I feel like we're dealing with a lot of principal agent problem kind of stuff.
We're dealing with a lot of problems, but go define that one for the people. I don't have it right in front of me, but I've heard of it.
The principal agent problem is when one person or group takes actions on behalf of another person or group, and those two parties have different interests or incentives. Easy examples are like elected officials and citizens have different goals. Like brokers and members of the market have different goals. In the case of human performance programs in the military, the bureaucratic part up in the clouds has different incentives and goals than the like on the ground commanders have. And so they're going to chase different things. And like what made me think is like, you're talking about the experience of like feeling like the program's always going to be cut at the level of like a brigade or a division or a corps or whatever. But like the program wasn't funded at any of those levels. That's not where
Correct.
It came from. Like the people who made the decisions to allocate the resources for it weren't at those echelons, because those echelons have different incentives and goals. Like they're playing different games, but they have some degree of control over the same resources all the time. It's just a muddy, complicated, yeah.
Right. And I mean, I guess to sort of bring it back, and I know because it's the after show, keep it brief, but like, it's just interesting. I think of all the, now that we're diving deeper into it, of kind of all the pillars, maybe with the exception of like the spiritual one, within the kind of scope of H2F, but like the cognitive one almost needs to have a longer leash, because injecting more and more metrics seems to, like we said, kind of degrade outcomes. And Kat, I think, did a phenomenal job sort of articulating what right should look like. And hopefully people who listen to this and are in those seats can kind of implement some of this stuff and create that kind of consultant type role in their own organization. So you're lucky that she works for you, because she's got a pretty cool thing going on there. She must have a cool boss.
She must. Somebody let her go on a crazy podcast. I don't know. Now you got me thinking about like why do we so comfortably invest resources into the chaplaincy when I have to wonder how much quantified impact the Chaplain Corps reports. A rough Google says there's like nearly 3,000 chaplains plus another nearly 3,000 religious affairs specialists. That's like 2 brigades worth of personnel that we invest into both spiritual wellness, readiness performance, and religious wellness, readiness performance. I have to wonder, and like maybe we need to talk to like somebody high up in the Chaplain Corps to find out like what.
Well, they're not ranked. There's no ranks anymore. So
what are their reportables? They still have ranks. They just don't wear it on their chest.
I know. I'm kidding.
But what are their reportables? Like, how do they demonstrate effectiveness, especially since so much of what they do is privileged communications where they can't report on it?
Oh, good point.
It'd be very interesting to know about how they justify their own existence.
And that,
or do we just believe in it? Do we just believe that that is worth it, and we don't yet believe that some of these other domains are worth it?
Well, in the context of Chaplain Corps, using terms like belief
They
No pun
know a thing
intended.
or two about belief.
Belief, yeah. And team, if ever there were a cliffhanger in the Mops and Mo's universe, it would be that. We will come back to that one soon. But for now, I think we should bid the team adieu, and we will see you next week.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you. Team, we all sleep. We all conduct a bunch of activities. We all train and we all recover from stress. Teamworks pulls it all together in real-time readiness dashboards because when data is connected, readiness follows. Visit teamworkstactical.com today to learn more.